The search had gone on for days. Flyers were posted, volunteers scoured the streets, and her book club friends left frantic messages that went unanswered. Melanie Anderson was missing. Then, in the early hours of November 18, 2018, police dogs picked up a scent in her backyard. Officers moved quickly, digging through the frozen Iowa ground, until they hit something: a blanket, a body, a secret that wasn't meant to be found. At first, no one understood why someone would do this. Melanie was loved, respected, a retired teacher, a devoted grandmother. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a bitter custody battle, a man consumed by rage, and a crime so brutal that it would leave the small town of Pella, Iowa, forever scarred. The person responsible? Not a stranger, not a drifter. It was a pastor, a man who once preached about love, faith, and forgiveness. And the motive? A twisted sense of revenge. What led to this crime? And how did a respected pastor turn into a monster? This is the case of Alan King Gibson. Welcome to True Crimes Corner, where we uncover the most chilling and untold cases. Some crimes shake communities to their core, and this is one of them. If you believe in exposing the truth, bringing awareness to real-life horror, and ensuring these stories aren't forgotten, subscribe and share this video. Because justice starts with knowing the truth. Pella, Iowa, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors greeted each other by name, and where Sunday mornings were sacred. It was a town built on faith, tradition, and community. But by the end of 2018, that image would be shattered. At the center of it all was Pastor Alan King Gibson. To the outside world, he was a man of God, charismatic, devoted, and deeply respected. He preached about forgiveness, family, and faith, with a conviction that made people believe he truly lived by those words. But his marriage to Anaya Gibson, once seen as strong, had become a battlefield. Alan's strict, controlling nature clashed with Anaya's growing independence. He had long demanded obedience, not just in their home, but in their faith. Everything had to be done his way. Over the years, Anaya grew tired of walking on eggshells, tired of feeling like she was just an accessory to his public image, and tired of pretending everything was fine. By early 2018, she made a decision that would change everything. She filed for divorce. Alan did not take it well. He saw it as a betrayal, an insult to his authority. He preached about the sanctity of marriage, and now his own was falling apart. But the real battle wasn't the divorce itself. It was the fight for the children. Stephanie, 12, and David, 9, were the center of their world. And Alan wasn't about to let them go without a fight. The custody battle became ugly. Alan used his position in the church to paint Anaya as unstable, claiming she was trying to rip the family apart. But Anaya had something stronger: evidence. She documented his emotional manipulation, his explosive temper, the way he used religion as a weapon in their home. She wasn't fighting alone. Her mother, Melanie Anderson, a retired schoolteacher and fiercely protective mother, stood by her side, providing financial support and emotional strength. Alan, however, believed Melanie was going beyond just supporting her daughter. Because Melanie wasn't just Anaya's mother, she was also dating Judge Robert Thompson, the very man overseeing the case. The relationship had begun months before the trial, completely unrelated to Alan. But when he found out, his paranoia exploded. He convinced himself that Melanie would use her connection to sway the judge's ruling. The courtroom was packed. Pella, Iowa, wasn't the kind of town where messy divorces made headlines, but when a well-known pastor was fighting for custody of his children, everyone paid attention. Alan King Gibson sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a dark suit. Across from him, Anaya sat beside her attorney, calm but visibly drained. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war. Alan had made sure of that. When Anaya filed for divorce in early 2018, Alan used every tool at his disposal to make her look like the problem. From the pulpit, he preached about marriage being under attack, about how the devil used weak-minded women to destroy homes. And though he never said her name, the message was clear. To his congregation, he was the victim. To the court, it was another story. Anaya's legal team had proof: text messages, emails, voice recordings of his threats and manipulation. They presented evidence of his emotional abuse, how he weaponized faith, belittled her, controlled every aspect of her life. And then there was Melanie. Her testimony was unflinching. She stood in court, looking Alan in the eye, and told the judge exactly what she thought of him. She called him a fraud, a hypocrite, a man who valued power more than family. Alan sat there, silent, but inside, his rage boiled over. He expected his reputation to protect him, but when the verdict came, it was clear that none of it had worked. Anaya was granted full custody. Alan was given supervised visits only. The ruling was devastating, but what broke him wasn't the judge's decision. It was who the judge was: Robert Thompson. A man Alan barely knew, until recently. It had started as a rumor. Then it became a whisper. And then, one evening, Alan saw them together. Melanie, Judge Thompson, walking out of a restaurant, laughing, holding hands. That was all it took. Alan's mind twisted the truth into something darker. To him, this was no coincidence. This was personal. He became obsessed with the idea that Melanie had secretly worked behind the scenes, pulling strings, sleeping with the judge to destroy his life. And now he had nothing left. His marriage was gone. His children were gone. His reputation was crumbling. But in his mind, there was still a way to take it all back. He just had to make sure the person who took it from him paid the price. The ruling should have been the end of it. Most men, after losing a custody battle, either moved on or fought through the legal system for another chance. But Alan King Gibson wasn't most men. He wasn't about to accept humiliation. He wasn't about to let a woman take away his family. And he certainly wasn't about to sit back while Melanie Anderson walked free. For the first few weeks after the verdict, Alan still played the part of the grieving father, the misunderstood victim. He stood at the pulpit, talking about perseverance in the face of injustice. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. He stopped returning calls. He ignored messages from his congregation. He skipped counseling sessions with his court-appointed supervisor. At night, he sat alone in his darkened house, drinking, staring at the walls, obsessing, replaying the courtroom scene over and over in his mind. But no matter how many times he thought about it, he always came back to one thing: Melanie. She was the reason his family was gone. She was the reason his name was dragged through the mud. And now, she was with the judge, the man who took his children from him. Alan convinced himself that this was no accident. Melanie had played him. She had plotted against him. And he couldn't let that stand. His obsession turned into action. He started following her. At first, it was small things. He would park a few houses down from her home, watching from his car. Then, he started memorizing her routine. She went grocery shopping every Wednesday at 10 a.m. She had book club every Friday night at 7 p.m. She visited the judge's house on Sundays after church. The more he watched, the more his hatred grew. Melanie was living her life, smiling, laughing, while he had lost everything. Then one night, sitting in his car, a thought entered his mind, one so dark and undeniable it sent a chill down his own spine. There was only one way to fix this. November 16th, 2018. Melanie Anderson was alone in her house, preparing for her weekly book club. She had no idea that outside, in the cold darkness of Pella, Iowa, Alan King Gibson was waiting. He had watched her all day, circling the block, making sure there were no unexpected visitors. At 6:52 p.m., her porch light flickered on, a sign that she was home, alone. At 7:03 p.m., Alan stepped out of his car and walked to her front door. He rang the doorbell. Melanie hesitated before answering. She hadn't seen him in weeks. The last time they spoke had been in court, when she testified against him. She cracked the door open just enough to see his face. Alan looked different. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt. He wasn't the polished pastor she once knew. He told her he just wanted to talk, that he needed closure. Melanie, despite her instincts, opened the door, and the moment she did, Alan shoved his way inside and locked it behind him. The confrontation started with words. Alan accused her of destroying his family, of manipulating the judge, of turning his children against him. Melanie didn't back down. She told him his own actions were to blame. That was all it took. Alan snapped. The attack was brutal, prolonged, and filled with rage. Melanie fought back as he forcefully undressed her. She clawed at his face, leaving deep scratches. She kicked, screamed, but no one could hear her. He wasn't delicate about it. He sucked her hard and bit her on the breast, then did the unbelievable with her. By the time it was over, her body lay lifeless on the living room floor. Alan stood over her body, breathing heavily, hands shaking. This was not the plan. He was supposed to scare her, make her suffer. But now he had to clean up his mess. He grabbed a towel, wiped his face, then dragged Melanie's body through the back door. The backyard was cold, damp, and quiet. Using nothing but his bare hands and a garden shovel, he dug a shallow grave near the fence. It took him over an hour. By the time he was done, his clothes were covered in dirt and blood. He stood over the grave, staring down at what he had done. Then, without a word, he walked back inside, locked the door behind him, and disappeared into the night. Melanie Anderson was gone, but the search for her was only beginning. The next morning, the town of Pella, Iowa, woke up to an unsettling silence. Melanie Anderson was supposed to be hosting her weekly book club at 7:30 p.m. the night before, but when her friends arrived, they found her house dark, her car parked in the driveway, and no sign of her anywhere. At first, they assumed she had simply gone out or forgotten to send a cancellation notice. But Melanie never missed book club. She was the type of person who sent reminders days in advance, someone whose absence, even for a single night, was unusual. By Saturday afternoon, calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. Her daughter, Anaya, was the first to sound the alarm, calling everyone she could think of. By evening, she filed an official missing person report. Within hours, the case gained full attention. Melanie wasn't just an ordinary woman. She was the mother of a pastor's ex-wife, a known figure in the community, and the partner of Judge Robert Thompson. People noticed when someone like her vanished. The police began a standard missing persons protocol, but something felt off from the start. Her purse was inside the house, untouched. Her front door was locked. Her phone was last active the night before, with no outgoing messages or calls after 7 p.m. Then, there was the security camera footage. A neighbor had a motion-activated camera pointed toward the street near Melanie's house. At 7:03 p.m., it recorded a car pulling up. The headlights were off. The silhouette of a man stepped out and approached the front door. The footage was grainy, but the make and model of the vehicle were clear. A dark-colored 2012 Ford Taurus, the same car registered to Alan King Gibson. With no sign of Melanie, the search expanded quickly. Volunteers, police officers, and search dogs combed the surrounding areas. They checked hospitals, highways, and nearby wooded areas. By Sunday morning, a group of officers returned to her home for a more thorough sweep. It was during this second search that one of the K9 units stopped at the backyard. The dog wouldn't move from a specific patch of ground near the wooden fence. A second dog was brought in. Same reaction. The officers looked at each other, knowing exactly what this meant. They grabbed their shovels and started digging. The soil was loose. It didn't take long before they hit fabric, something wrapped in a blanket. The moment they peeled it back, the search for Melanie Anderson ended. She had been buried in her own backyard, hidden under the dirt like a discarded secret. The police didn't waste another second. Alan King Gibson was officially the prime suspect. The moment investigators uncovered Melanie Anderson's body, the case turned from a missing persons report to a full-scale homicide investigation. Her cause of death was immediately apparent. The injuries were severe, brutal, and clearly intentional. But what stood out the most was the desperation in how she had been buried. The grave was shallow, rushed. Whoever did this wasn't an expert at covering up crimes, but they had tried. As forensic analysts collected evidence, the police zeroed in on their suspect, Alan King Gibson. It wasn't just the fact that he was the last person seen at Melanie's house, or that his car was identified in security footage. It was the fact that everything pointed to a man who had every reason to want Melanie gone. Alan had no solid alibi for the night of Melanie's disappearance. When detectives brought him in for questioning, his story was full of gaps. He claimed he was at home all night, that he had gone to bed early. But his phone records told a different story. At 6:45 p.m., his phone pinged near Melanie's neighborhood. At 7:12 p.m., a neighbor's camera caught his car near her house. By 9:30 p.m., his phone was back at his own home, a 2-hour window where Melanie was attacked, killed, and buried. And Alan had no explanation for it. As police dug deeper, they found even more evidence tying Alan to the murder. His fingerprints were found on the back door handle of Melanie's house. Forensic experts found dirt from her backyard in the treads of his shoes. And then, there was the most damning evidence of all: DNA. Under Melanie's fingernails, there were skin cells. She had fought for her life. The DNA was tested. It was a match to Alan. When the evidence was presented, Alan's demeanor changed. At first, he denied everything. He insisted he hadn't seen Melanie in weeks. But when confronted with the security footage, the phone records, and the DNA match, he stopped talking altogether. By the evening of November 19, 2018, Alan King Gibson was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. News of Alan's arrest spread fast. The congregation that once stood by him was now in shock. Some refused to believe he was guilty. Others felt betrayed. This was a man they had trusted, a man they had looked to for guidance. Now, he was being led out of his own home in handcuffs. And in the days that followed, even more secrets would come to light. The trial of Alan King Gibson began on March 4, 2019, in a packed Iowa courtroom. The prosecution wasted no time painting a picture of a man who had lost everything and chose revenge over reason. They presented a clear timeline, showing how Alan had been consumed by hatred, stalking Melanie for weeks before finally snapping. The jury listened as forensic experts explained how DNA evidence, phone records, and security footage placed Alan at the scene of the crime. Anaya Gibson sat in the courtroom every day. She had once built a life with this man. Now, she was watching him fight for his own. Their children, Stephanie and David, were kept away from the proceedings, shielded from the gruesome details of what their father had done. But the weight of it all was impossible to escape. Alan's defense team argued that there was no direct eyewitness to the murder. They tried to cast doubt on the forensic findings, suggesting that Alan's DNA under Melanie's fingernails could have come from an old encounter, maybe a handshake or a past argument. But the evidence was overwhelming. It was undeniable. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned. As the trial neared its end, the jury remained stone-faced. The people of Pella, Iowa, had come looking for answers, but what they found was something much darker. This was not a man of God who had made a mistake. This was a man who had believed himself above consequence, until it was too late. On March 22, 2019, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Alan sat motionless as the words echoed through the courtroom. His once powerful voice, the one that had delivered countless sermons, was now silent. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel fell, and just like that, the man who had once led a congregation walked away in shackles. The courtroom was still. There were no gasps, no cries, only the weight of justice finally catching up. The trial was over, but the aftermath of Alan King Gibson's crime lingered like a shadow over Pella, Iowa. His conviction brought legal closure, but for those who had been closest to him, the wounds would never fully heal. Anaya Gibson remained in town, determined to give her children a sense of stability, despite the horror their father had brought upon their family. She refused to let Alan's actions define their future. Her role in the community changed. Once the wife of a pastor, she was now a woman rebuilding her life in the same town where her husband had committed an unthinkable crime. Some people pitied her, others admired her strength. Stephanie and David struggled with the truth. As they grew older, they would come to understand exactly what their father had done. Stephanie, now in her teens, was quiet about it, refusing to discuss the case in school. David, still young, asked questions that his mother couldn't always answer. Anaya did her best to shield them, but the weight of their father's crime followed them everywhere. Judge Robert Thompson, the man who had unknowingly become a central figure in Alan's paranoia, eventually stepped down from the bench. While he had ruled fairly, the connection to Melanie Anderson, the woman Alan had murdered, was something that never left him. The church building stood empty, a reminder of the pastor who had fallen from grace in the most horrific way. Betrayal, obsession, revenge. These aren't just words. They're the forces that turned a respected pastor into a murderer. Alan King Gibson believed he was entitled to everything: his family, his power, his reputation. But when it was taken from him, he didn't seek justice. He sought destruction. And in the end, all he did was seal his own fate. If stories like this need to be told, if you believe in exposing the darkness that hides in plain sight, then subscribe to True Crimes Corner. Share this video, because the only way to stop monsters like this is to never let their stories be forgotten.